In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to sew your threads in using the magic thread into the start of your gold circle. I'm also going to show you how to start the first trail in the rainbow sequence. I've already done my last picot on this side, and I have now taken my worker, this pair here, back over to the left hand side. And I do that because it then fills the gap between the end of the one part of the circle and the gap between the start of the circle. The first thing I'm going to do is take out that pin. And this is the pin that I started with, which had two pairs hung side by side on it. So I'm going to just take my magic threads and work out, if you pull them apart, you should end up with two loops. And by pulling them apart, you'll be able to see which one is your worker, which was the pair on the left, and which loop is the one for the passive. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold both ends and just make sure they run through the pinhole. And I'm also going to remove all the twists on this loop. This blue seems to have got quite twisted, so it's now got no loops, and that will make it easier to slide through. I've got my passives here, and I'm going to put the right hand bobbin through this loop. Now, because I'm doing cross stitch, I haven't put any twists on these pairs at all, because I want to make the circle look and appear as if it was a solid ring without any joins in it. So I'm going to take the tension off the bobbin that I've just put through the loop, and I'm going to very carefully, with a Lazy Susan, hold it in the loop, and I'm going to pull the ends of my magic thread so the loop pops through the hole. As soon as I see the loop of my thread, I'm going to put my Lazy Susan in and use the loop to pull the thread and make it bigger rather than the magic thread. And then I'm going to remove the magic thread. I'm not going to bin this thread, I'm going to keep it for the next time I need it, because there's been no wear and tear on that thread because I used the thread of the bobbin to pull through. I'm then going to take my other bobbin, let me just show you that again. I'm going to put my other bobbin down through the loop. Then with my Lazy Susan, I'm going to hold on to the loop from the bobbin and guide it down. And as you can see, this isn't quite so straightforward because we've got pins and metallic thread. So that's my first one sewn in. And that loop has moved away from the point, the edge where we put it originally, and is now in line with all the others. I'm just going to change the camera angle and show you from a distance. So I've zoomed out, and this is my last pair I need to put in, and here's my magic thread. So I'm just going to slide it, hold on to both ends, slide it through to make sure there's no obstruction in that hole. And I'm going to make sure that there's no twists on this thread. There we are. And this time, it doesn't matter whether you use your left or your right bobbin. So this time I'm going to use my left bobbin. Put it down through the loop on your magic thread. Take the tension off of that thread, and then use your Lazy Susan to guide the magic thread loop. It avoids catching on any of the pins. And then once it's near the hole, if you're having trouble getting it through, you can flick it with your fingernail and it pulls the thread through. And I can now see a loop. So I'm going to use my Lazy Susan, not the magic thread, to pull that loop up. I'm going to remove my magic thread. Save that for another time because there's been nothing happened to that magic thread. So I've got a loop here. One of the things that you need to make sure when doing a sewing is there's no twists on this thread. Sometimes it comes in and it's twisted like that, and if you try and pull that down, that will cause a great bulk in your work and it won't actually lay flat. So you want to take the twists off so that it looks like, so that there's no twists here. So I've got my loop and I'm putting my other bobbin through that loop. I'm then going to transfer the loop to my Lazy Susan and then gently guide it down. Give it a tug. Now this one, ideally you do actually want to put the pin in because this was one of our pin holes. If I can, I will. If you pull your pairs out to the side, the pinhole should reopen and then it'll be a question of finding the pinhole. There we are. So because it's the edge, it's going to be, and it's got to be tied with a knot. If you start pulling it without having a pin in place, it will distort your lace. So that's the only one I will put back. I won't worry about the middle pairs. So now all my pairs have been sewn in and I'm ready to do my reef knot. So the way I do my reef knot, let me start with this one. I've already done 2 sew-ins and one reef knot. So this is my pairs and I hold them up like that, and the first part I'm going to do is right over left. So right over left through that, and then there's your knot. Now I always pull down from above. Then I'm going to do left over right and slide it from above. If you have lots of pairs, I would always cut these off so that once they're tied, you know that they're dealt with and they're finished. Because I've only got 4, I know, and I'm going to cut them off in a minute. So let me show you that movement again for your reef knot. So there's my 2 bobbins and I'm holding on to the end that has the thread wrapped around it, and I'm going to go right over left, and then rather than pull from here to tighten your knot, if you pull from right up here, the knot actually gets in closer. Apart from this one, I think I just caught it around that pin. So let me just unhook that. There we go. I'm going to push that pin down. That's it. So you tighten it from above. Then left, take your left bobbin and the thread from the right bobbin around and tighten from above. Now normally with metallic thread I would put a third movement, so I would do right over left, left over right, and then right over left again. But this is being stiffened, so I know that ends will be secured by the stiffener, which acts like a glue. So this is my last pair. So holding on to the ends with the thread, right over left, and I just use my thumb to lift the thread over that bobbin, and I'm holding on to this bobbin here so it doesn't slide out from here, because the tendency when you're first doing this is that this thread here slides over the top, and that then means you don't actually tie a knot. So you hold the bobbins like so. I'm catching the spangle in this part of my hand, guiding this thread over, and by holding on to this spangle, this thread stays underneath. And I'm going to tighten the bobbin, tighten the knot from above. So then I'm doing left over right, and this time I think your hands behave differently. So this time I'm just holding, I've got the thread here in this part of my hand and the bobbin rests there, and then I'm just guiding that thread over that bobbin. And there's my knot. Now some threads, the knot, if you've got a very shiny thread, the knot will come undone. So what I've done here is I've laid the bobbins down and I'm actually tensioning up this knot first. So I'm pulling, then I can go back to this knot, pull it a bit closer, and then I can go back over to here, tension up again, pull this knot a bit closer, and you can do that till you're quite close. Just keep tightening it, and then again make sure you're tightening the last bit from above, not from here. You want it to be really snug against your lace. So those 4 pairs have now been sewn in and tied off. So the next part is going to be adding the first red stripe of your rainbow. I've cut off my bobbins and I've just wrapped the threads around a pin and placed it in my pillow, and I'm now going to cover those threads up with my cover cloth. This does a couple of things. It keeps your threads tidy and out of your way, but it also trains the threads to lay in that particular position. And we are going to have to move those from time to time as we work around. But if you pin it in the same hole, over time those threads will get used to being in that position. I've now wound a pair of bobbins, and this bobbin has at least 2 armfuls on each bobbin. So in total there's at least 4 armfuls of thread on this pair. And before winding the second bobbin, I've threaded a bead onto this thread. So we've got a bobbin, a bead, and then the second bobbin. I'm then going to take, I've already wound 1 bobbin here, and I want to put a second pair onto this bead. So I've got my end here, and with my Lazy Susan I'm going to pop it through the hole, make a loop and thread the end through that loop, and then pull it all the way through. And I now have my bobbins on 1 bead. I'm going to wind this bobbin up. You will need 3 pairs with at least 2 armfuls on each bobbin, and 2 pairs with at least 1 armful on each bobbin. So in total, the pairs that will go in the middle of the trail will have at least 4 armfuls, and the passives down the edge, the 2 edge pairs, will have at least 2. The 2 pairs down the edge don't actually travel very far, so you don't actually need to have that much thread on them. Now I want to pin this bead onto my work, so I'm going to hold the threads tight like this against my finger, because I don't want my pin to go through any of the threads. So I can now slide my pin straight through and pop it in the hole. and that's the red pinhole at the start of your trail. So some of these trails, 6 of these trails have joins, and this trail here, the first one, doesn't. There's a gap because it's a rainbow, so we want to have a gap here. And if you want to put a join in, that's entirely up to you. It is a bigger gap between these two and these two, so it will be a longer join, but it will be done in exactly the same way as all the other threads are joined. So I've got pin with my bead on it and my 2 pairs, and I'm just going to put 2 twists on these. So that's 1, 2. Then going to put a pin in here as my support pin and hang one of my pairs that doesn't have quite so much on it. So one of my edge pairs, just going to shorten this thread. So that's there. Now the other 2 pairs I need to attach to the ring, because I've got 6 pinholes here which are really close to the ring. So the threads, the worker thread, will be attached around 4 of those pinholes, and the other 2 will be joined by the pairs. Now my metal ring, if you want to colour your metal ring, you can colour it with nail varnish. 2 coats of nail varnish will work at least. I think 1 would be too thin. But the other thing, if you don't want to colour your ring, is this area here is where the metal has been joined, and I can hide that behind some threads. So I've got my pair which has about 4 armfuls at least on it, and I'm going to join that onto the ring. The way I'm going to do that is with a Lazy Susan or a crochet hook. I'm going to take any tension off of this thread because it makes it harder to pull the threads through if you've got tension on it. Just going to slightly lift the ring and catch the threads underneath it. That doesn't matter at this point whether your threads are down here or up there. I'm now going to put both the bobbins through my loop, and before I pull this loop tight, I'm going to slide it up, because this part here can be quite hard because it's different thicknesses. It can be quite hard to slide over, so I'm going to actually tighten my bobbins on that point. I'm then going to put 2 twists on that pair, and that leaves us, we need 5 pairs, and that leaves us with our last pair, which again has about two armfuls on the pair, at least 1 on each bobbin. So again, with my Lazy Susan, I'm going to lay my thread here, lift the ring slightly, and just catch the threads. Then put both the bobbins through this loop, and this one can just be tensioned and slid into place. Now these ones will be taken in at the right place on the trail, so I don't need to worry about where they are positioned. And then I want to put 2 twists on that pair. Now I've pinned my ring close to all the pinholes, and I've used berry pins. These, once you get a few trails on, these can actually be removed, but they can also be removed and moved if they are in your way. I've got one under here which might cause some problems as I'm working it, but they're there just to keep the ring secure while you attach to the threads to them. But after 2 or 3 trails, you'll find that the the ring is fine. Right, let's see what we've got here. So we have, on the very left, we have one pair on a support pin. Then we have a worker pair that's attached around the bead. Then we have, I'm just tightening these up. Then we have 2 passives, and then we have our final outside pair. So I'm going to start with the second pair from the left, which is our worker pair, and I'm going to cross stitch through the pair that's on the bead and cross stitch through the first pair that is coming from the ring. I'm going to put 2 twists on my worker, and then I'm going to pin up in the first green pinhole. And I'm going to give everything a little bit of attention because we're using thicker thread and it does have a tendency of causing loops. So with my worker, I'm now going to cross stitch back through those 2 pairs and pick up the pair on my support pin. I'm going to put 2 twists on this pair, the worker pair, and pin up in that green pinhole. So just like the inside, the red pinhole denotes 2 pairs and the green pinholes is for 1 pair. Now I'm just going to lengthen that a little bit. I'm not going to lengthen it too much because I've got this thread here that once I take out my support pin, it will drop that pair down. So I'm now going to cross stitch back through my 3 pairs. And then I'm going to take in this last pair that's on the ring. Twist twice and pin up in the green pinhole. So I'm going to just slide the threads up. And again, I'm just going to carefully just give it a little bit of attention. I'm now going to cross stitch back to the other side. Put 2 twists on my worker pair and pin up in the next pinhole. And when you're doing this, you want to follow your zigzag line. So there's my cross stitch area starting to grow. At this point, I'm now going to remove my support pin, and having these 2 shorter is like a reminder. The amount of times I forget to take out my support pins and have to go back. Passives aren't quite so bad, but when it's your worker, it does take a little while. So now this is a half stitch trail with cross stitch and twist edges. So we haven't got any of the pattern in at the moment. I prefer to do my pattern gently. If I was to go straight into this pattern now, you would have a gap, a square bit. It would literally be a line across here going from your cross stitch straight into your half stitch and your cross stitch and twist. So rather than have that, I like to do introduce mine gradually. So I'm going to do it 1 pair at a time. So the first pair that I'm going to start putting the pattern on with is this pair here by the ring, the very right hand pair. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is put a twist on. I'm now going to cross stitch through 3 pairs, and I've reached my outside pair which needs to begin patterning. So I'm having putting a cross stitch and twist edge on. So that what I'm going to do is put a twist on my worker pair and then work cross stitch and twist both pairs. I'm going to tension it up a little bit. Now this pinhole is next to the ring, so I want to attach my worker pair to the ring. So I'm just going to lengthen my worker pair, put another twist on, and then I'm going to leave them quite loose. So taking my Lazy Susan or a crochet hook, whichever you prefer, I'm going to just slightly lift up my ring, and I'm going to catch those 2 threads from my worker pair and pull them through. Now, there we are. And what I have here is a loop underneath the ring. I'm going to take my bobbins and I'm going to put them through that loop. Now if I pull that loop now, can you see my bobbins are on the outside of that ring? And so it's going to cause a bit of friction as I move them round. So what I have found works really well is if I just loosen off that loop again. Before I pull it tight, I take a pin and I put it in that loop and pin up in the pinhole. So you're going to have to probably slide all the threads up. So here's my loop, and I'm going to place the pin, making sure I don't catch any of my threads. And if I now tension up that, my threads have been pulled to the inside of the loop here. So they're coming off in the right angle. I'm then going to put a couple of twists on and go back to using my pairs. So the first thing I'm going to do is a cross stitch and twist, because this edge pair is now in the pattern. I'm going to cross stitch through the rest until I reach the other end. I'm going to put 2 twists on and pin up. Just give everything a little bit of a tug to get rid of the loops. So now I've done the pattern with this first bobbin, this first pair of bobbins twice. First going to the ring and then coming back out to the ring. So I'm now going to take the next pair, and in the middle of my trail is going to be half stitch. So I can now bring the second pair from the right into the pattern. And in order to do that, I'm going to put a twist on that pair. So I'm going to cross stitch through 2, put a twist on my worker pair and half stitch through the second pair from the right, and then cross stitch and twist. Extra twist, and then just tension everything up, and we're going to be putting this pair around the ring again. Oh, I know where that, so I was just trying to find that loop, and because I did the half stitch, all my pairs disappear from each other. So right, so let's loosen my thread, lift my ring slightly, move the thread over there. This isn't going to be quite so difficult for you because I'm having to do it to the camera, and so you can see, and so it's quite awkward, but it won't be that awkward for you. It might look awkward at the moment, but it won't be for you because you're not having to film it. So I'm putting both my bobbins through, and then I take a pin and slide my threads up and put it in that loop, so the loop goes around my pin. Set 2 twists, and then we're back to the pattern. So cross stitch and twist through that first pair. I'm just going to shorten this pair. Now this second pair, remember, is half stitch, so half stitch that one, then we go back into cross stitch for the last 2 pairs, 2 twists and pin up. Give everything a little tension. I'm just going to lengthen those 2. Now, unlike the inside of the gold ring, or the edge of the gold ring, we were doing 3 twists. But because this thread is the same thickness as any thread that is joining onto it, we only need to do two twists around the pin. We now have the edge pair on the right and the first half stitch pair into the pattern, and we've done this half stitch pair twice, so we can now bring in the third pair from the right. So put a twist on that pair, and we're going to cross stitch through the first pair, twist the worker, half stitch, and cross stitch and twist. Tension up as best you can. Now we've got half stitch involved, it doesn't tension up very easily. Put an extra twist on this worker pair. I'm going to lengthen it, put it near the ring, and then lift the ring and slide my Lazy Susan through to try and catch the threads. There we are. I'm then going to put both bobbins through that loop and put the pin in, slide the threads up and put the pin in the pinhole. It should be there somewhere, there it is. Then carefully tension up your threads and put 2 twists on the worker pair. I'm just going to shorten these threads. Once you're not sewing around the ring, the threads will tend to stay at the right length. But because we're lengthening them to go around the ring, they do have a habit of coming undone. So we've got 2 twists on there by the looks of it. Just give everything a little bit of a tension. We're going to cross stitch and twist that first pair, half stitch the next 2, and then cross stitch this last one. 2 twists and pin up. So we've now done 2 rows with 3 pairs doing the pattern, so we can now bring the 4th and final pair into the pattern. So pop a twist on that pair, and we're going to cross stitch and twist, half stitch, and cross stitch and twist. And we've got one more pin that is close to the ring, so that means one more sewing. So an extra twist on those 2, just lengthen them. I'm just going to lift the ring and pull the threads through. You can almost push them through, but it is easier for me to show you with a Lazy Susan. So 2 bobbins through, slide the threads up and put the pin in the pinhole. And carefully tension those threads and put 2 twists on them. Give everything a little bit of a tension. Just remember that one of the pairs that's gone round this end ring is in the middle of your work through the half stitch. So what has happened, because we've done the introduce the pattern gradually rather than just all in one go, it has created a diagonal line, and I feel personally that's a little bit gentler than just going straight into the pattern, because otherwise if you introduced all of the threads together you would end up with it going cross stitch and then pattern, and you would get this line. It's almost like a dividing line between half stitch trail and your cross stitch, whereas this is a gentle ease into the pattern. So now I'm going to continue with my zigzag line. So let's do the first one, because this is going to be the first pin without it being sewn around the ring. So I'm going to do cross stitch and twist that first pair, half stitch, and cross stitch and twist. Pin up. Now you can tension a little bit with half stitch, but generally speaking it's it moves. So the minute you pull one bobbin, it moves one direction, and when you pull it the other way, it moves in the other direction. So half stitch is a little bit trickier. And one of the reasons I put the extra twist on this edge is that it brings the when you do half stitch, you end up with one worker, not a pair. But by doing the extra twist on this edge, so at the moment this brown bobbin with my fairy on it is my leader. So if you keep an eye on that, so I'm going to cross stitch and twist, and so this bobbin is going to go all the way across. It is my single worker in my half stitch. I've now reached the other end, and I'm going to cross stitch and twist, and I'm going to put an extra twist on, and I can pin up. Just tension up. You can see that loop by that pin hasn't quite disappeared, and it's there. This is one of the problems with half stitch, is all your pairs move. So now I'm going to cross stitch and twist, and because I put that extra twist on, my fairy bobbin is still the leader. I always think of it as the leader because it's the first one going across. Cross stitch and twist again. Now, one of the benefits I find with having the same worker going backwards and forwards is that it tensions your half stitch up quicker. If you're changing your worker every row, that worker, as you can see, one pair always ends up in the middle. And if you're changing your worker every row, that's not going to tension up as quickly as if you're using the same worker. Saying that, there is a reason not to put the extra twist on. That's what I really like about lace, is you say one thing and then something else will contradict it. Now, if this worker was running out of thread and I wanted to change it, if I don't put the extra twist on, you'll see that I'll go back with my bare bobbin. So I've just done one twist. I'm going to pin up. Just give everything a little bit of attention, and I'm going to cross stitch and twist. Can you see my bare bobbin is now my leader? So if any time you're running out of thread on your worker bobbin for your half stitch, simply leaving off one of the twists will mean that you can switch that bobbin out for another worker. And that is a lot easier than putting in a new thread, because with half stitch, because it's so open, if you put a new thread in here, it's going to show. So I would always do it sooner rather than later, because you can never gauge how much thread you're using when you're working half stitch. And all the threads move, so you use a lot more than you actually realise. So I'm going to continue down this trail, just going backwards and forwards until I reach here. And there I have a back stitch. Each trail has 2 back stitches. And the reason you have a back stitch is it's on a curve. So this inner curve is tighter than this outer curve. So if I didn't have that back stitch, the trail would run away, and I would be further along on the inside than the outside. So I need to catch my outside up to my inside, if that makes sense. So by using an inner side pin twice, it means that I can do 3 pinholes for that 1 pinhole on the inside. So it brings my trail back to being straight again. So I'm going to quickly work down to that point and show you how to do your back stitch. I've worked my trail down to the point and I've zoomed in a bit so you can see the back stitch easily. It's this point here and you can see the 3 lines, and I've just pinned up here just before the back stitch, and as you can see my threads are going in this direction, and ideally when you work a trail you want them to come down straight and square to the pinholes. It's always easier to catch this trail up sooner rather than later, because this would have just carried on getting worse as it went down. So by doing it here, it's going to square this back up again so that my trails are actually going downhill rather than uphill. So I've pinned in this side. Let me pull all my bobbins back over. So I'm going to work back to the inside of my trail as normal, and this first row is going to be exactly the same as all the previous rows. So I've reached the other end, twisted twice, and I'm pinning up. I'm now going to work back to the outside of my trail as normal and pin up. This time, however, I'm going to work back to the pin I'm going to make my back stitch on, but I'm not going to work this last pair here. So I'm going to cross stitch and twist. Just going to tension that up, 2 half stitches, and I'm not working this last pair. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this worker pair up and take the threads anti-clockwise around that pin, and make sure that you place the bobbins on the outside. You're then going to lift up the pair that hasn't worked that pin and move them over the top. And then you will carry on. And if you want your worker back, you put a twist on that pair. Carry on back across the row. And you will find yourself now following your zigzag line, and can you see these two have now squared up to this trail, and it's going downhill now. So I'm going to work down to the next one, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like from a distance, not quite so close up, so you can see exactly what happens with the bobbins. I've reached the point of my second back stitch, and I've zoomed out so that you can see what happens with the bobbins. So I've pinned up for my first pin over here, and my back stitch pin is this next pin on the inside. So I'm going to cross stitch and twist, then 2 half stitches, and then cross stitch and twist as normal. Extra twist and pin up. Give everything a little bit of a tension because we're dealing with thicker thread. So now I'm going to go back to the outside. I always think of this side as my outside and this is my inside, because it's curved. So if you think of a circle, this is the inside of your circle and this is the outside of your circle. So I've done cross stitch and twist, half stitch, and then cross stitch and twist, and then an extra twist on this end pair. the worker pair and pin up. Now this pattern is getting a lot tighter now as we reach the nearer the inside of the circle. So after this back stitch, a few more pins, and then I'll be changing the pattern back to cross stitch again. But that will be in the next part of these instructions. So I'm now doing the back stitch, and I'm going to be using this pin I just placed on the inside a second time. So I'm going to cross stitch and twist, half stitch, and I'm not working this end pair. Instead, what I'm going to do is lift this worker pair up and place it anti-clockwise around the pin I placed previously, and the worker pair is now on the outside. This is the pair I haven't worked, and I will lift that over the worker pair. And if you want the worker bobbin to be back into use, you'll need to put a twist on this pair. But this is a good place that if you're getting short of thread, you can not put the extra twist on and you can switch your worker. I'm then going to half stitch back through my two pairs and then cross stitch and twist my end pair. Extra twist and pin up. Give everything a little bit of a tug and then cross stitch and twist, half stitch, cross stitch and twist, and you're back to normal and you're following your zigzag line. So in the next part of the instructions, I will show you how to turn back into the cross stitch and sew the pairs into this ring here. So now you've learned how to start your first trail and how to do a back stitch.